It's 11 o'clock, so everybody good to get started? Perfect, thanks. So this is going to be a much more applied exercise. And so for reference, I'm Laura Cimoli. I'm one of the ICCS research fellows. So as you probably know, ICCS has a team of software engineers, and it also has like 4 or 5, I guess now, independent research fellows. So I'm one of them. And we really span like, I guess, a wide range of topics in terms of research, from developing like a new machine learning algorithm all the way to the more like applied side of things, which is actually where I sit. So in terms of background, I'm a physical oceanographer, so I'm interested in general in ocean circulation and using different tools to really detect the changes in ocean circulations and what it means for the redistribution of heat and carbon around the globe. Today's exercise is just going to give an example of how, for example, machine learning can be used to really like improve our observational system. So I work a lot with in situ observations, which are still very much sparse in time and space. So that point will become clear. And so we can't necessarily always use machine learning to like map things where we don't have information if we really don't have like the core like observation data available. So this, in terms of credit, this is really actually mostly put together by Anna de Misselmer at the University of Reading. So this exercise is really based on her paper in 2021. You will have references at the end of the presentation, which will be available, and as well as in the Jupyter notebook. So big thanks actually to Anna for putting this together as well. So this is just a modified version basically of her exercise. In terms of like very brief outline, I'll give a short introduction to really the problem. So it's going to be clear, like, you know, what are we trying to do? This exercise is not going to focus necessarily on the machine learning architecture. So it's a neural network problem, but there are different like courses, like one was early this morning as well. You can watch the recordings from the previous summer schools to get more information about, you know, introduction to neural networks. This is much more on the applied side. And then we'll just get to the exercise. Right, but so what's the problem? Well, the problem is that, well, we know that due anthropogenic like forcing, we are actually increasing the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And we know that the ocean plays a big role in sequestering that carbon. So about 25% to 30% of anthropogenic carbon emissions have been already actually taken up, like sequestered in the ocean. And this happens through different processes. So this is just a schematic to give you an idea of like how does the carbon basically end up in the ocean. And so you have like a solubility cycle, which is mostly like, if you wish, also called physical pump. So carbon gets dissolved in the water. And this is strongly regulated by mixed layer dynamics. So like the dynamics really of the circulation in the top of the surface of the ocean. Because of course you can think about if those waters do not contain a lot of carbon and have time to equilibrate the atmosphere, we will uptake carbon. And so will become a net sink of carbon. Vice versa, if you have waters that are carbon rich, for example, when you have a quelling of deep water, then that can become a carbon source. So outgas carbon to the atmosphere. So this is really then what really then that controls like the exchange with the atmosphere. And then on top of this dynamics, you have a biological cycle. So through processes like photosynthesis and respiration, again, that of course leads to carbon's exchange with the atmosphere. So we're not going into the details, right, of which process dominates, but the point is like this, there is both ocean dynamics and biogeochemical processes that contribute to this exchange of carbon with the atmosphere. And as you can imagine, this is going to be temporally and spatially variable. And indeed, what you end up with, this is like the video that is now playing, shows the air-sea carbon flux, which you can see is variable both in time and in space. So anything blue here means that the ocean is uptaking carbon from the atmosphere. And anything in red is outgassing. So for example, you have here in like the tropical Pacific, a large outgassing area, because that is like where you're upwelling deep waters that has long been respired, so it is carbon rich, and so it's releasing the carbon to the atmosphere. In general, in other areas, especially in the northern latitudes, where you have a sinking of water, that is a net carbon sink, because waters can equilibrate with the atmosphere, sequester the carbon, and then it stores it down in the ocean interior. And that is particularly important in the Southern Ocean, which is like about, the the ocean as a net, despite, all of this like temporal and spatial variability, the ocean in the net is a sink of carbon, and about 40% of the carbon that is sequestered, that sequestration happens in the Southern Ocean. So that's a very important region. And despite that, we are actually, so let me see if I can move. How to, do you know how to, yeah. I don't see it anymore here, but it's still there. Oh, it's for me. Thank you, perfect. Yeah, so despite, like being so important, like the Southern Ocean is actually the area where we miss most of the observations. So we lack observations there. And so what this translates into is that plot over there. Sorry, it's a bit small, I guess, but what it shows, that shows the annual CO2 flux in black for model outputs and in blue for data, so observation-based product. And you can see there is actually about 30% discrepancies between the two. So one is like models in general do not capture very well these fluxes, both because of a misparameter. I mean, it happens, as you can see, it's very temporal and spatial intermittent, so it's hard to capture. It happens also, it's regulated by both physical and especially biogeochemical parameterizations, which are not well represented in the models. And we don't have a lot of observations in crucial area like the Southern Ocean. And so when it also gets to the data-based products of the line in blue, again, those are based on all the observations that we have, but I'll show you in a second, those are also very sparse in time and space. Right, which actually gets to, yes, so what data do we have? And actually so when I talk about air CO2 fluxes, we mostly look at the PCO2, so the partial pressure of CO2. So it really depends, again, with like, basically, do you have a pressure gradient between the atmosphere and the ocean, and in which direction is it going? Is it outgassing or intaking? So the top here shows the observation of a partial pressure of CO2 in the ocean. So this is a compiled data set. It's just called the SOCAT, which is like the Surface Ocean CO2 Atlas. And you can see this, like this is seems to show that we have a lot of data, and we have quite a lot of data points indeed. But then I'll point to some limitations. So the first one is like most of this data is compiled from ship-based observations. So most of research vessels, as well as some like volunteer basically ship, have sensors on board. And what they do is like as they transit, they pump water and then from the surface of the ocean, and then that water is analyzed through a sensor and then measure the PCO2 along the ship line. So you can imagine, again, some ship tracks, like trading, for example, routes, will be extremely well sampled. So which is most of this data set is actually comes from those ship lines. Then we have the moorings. The moorings are basically stationarily like observation points, so moored at the seafloor. These are indicated by squares here. So moorings are great in giving like long time series, but they're very, again, sparse in space. They only have a few locations, but they're good at catching like a continental margins, for example. And then we have drifters, which are surface buoy. We just basically deploy them in the water. Again, those are mostly deploying along ship lines, so we can't always reach, again, areas. Like you can see the whole Southern Ocean, we don't really sail much there. So we still have a big gaps in that region. As we say, same for drifter, we can cover some of that with drifters, but not really all of that. So altogether, we have about 41 million data points, which throughout these decades, which is a lot, but again, very sparse in space because a good chunk of the Southern Ocean, which again is very important for the carbon cycle, has not been sampled yet. And also very sparse in time because, as I was saying, which is like what is shown here. So this shows for the same data set, like the number of months over which we have data from 1907 to 2023. And again, you can see like wherever we have like ship lines that like, are routinely like sampled, then we have lots of data there throughout the whole year. But for many of the ship lines, especially again in the Southern Ocean, we don't have that many months because again, we only sail maybe there in summer. And actually some of these lines might have been sampled really only once or twice over decades. So we both lack in some areas any time of temporal variability in the sense we don't have information about long-term trends, but in most areas we also don't have information about interannual variability because we only sample a few months and even more so of a seasonal cycle. And as you saw from the movie before, there is a lot of variability even on daily like time scales. So we completely lack any type again of specialist like higher frequency variability. So the data is extremely sparse in space and time. I will argue probably even more in time than in space in these type of problems. And so, I mean, generally, machine learning has been applied in different ways to try to map data wherever we don't have observations. But you can't really do it if you're lacking observation to train your model, which is the problem here. So we know we're not good at extrapolating. So on this problem, what we're trying to do is actually to use machine learning to inform us about where should we sample, and especially like how many more sensors do we need and where, and kind of try to optimize the sampling strategy to kind of keep it also as efficient as possible and inexpensive as possible. So how can we do that? It's because we also have autonomous floats that can give us information about the PCO2. So these are called Argo floats. I assume some of you might be familiar with that, maybe not all of you. So just give a quick recap of how they work. They're autonomous floats that are deployed from a ship. If you wish, like how they look like, it's really like a cylinder, if you wish, like 1.5 meters more or less tall. And it has a sensors at the top and an antenna to communicate via satellite. So that, and they have a buoyancy engine, so they can adjust the depth at which they float. So how it works is once it has been deployed from step one, it's going to descend to about to a kilometer. Then that float is going to drift at that kilometer normally for about 9 days. That can be like user defined. Then it sinks to 2 kilometers and it comes back up to the surface. And during this ascent is when it samples all the parameters that it can sample. Most floats sample temperature and salinity only, so that's what are called like the core Argo floats. But we have now new floats, like the one schematically like shown on the right, which is a biogeochemical float. So those are like geared up with more sensors, and including among those sensors, there is a pH sensor. And that's useful in this case because pH is linked to the carbon chemistry. And so we can use it then to infer information of PCO2. And I'm not a carbon chemist, so don't ask more information about what is here, I guess. That's my knowledge of carbon chemistry kind of stops here. But the point is like you have like CO2 in the atmosphere, but again, it can be dissolved in the water. So this is actually going basically be your PCO2 if information is given by this concentration. But once in the water, that CO2 can dissociate in carbon and release 1 hydrogen proton. And that can further dissociate into bicarbonate and in bicarbons and then gives like 2 hydrogen proton. So the pH is related to the concentration of hydrogen proton in the water. And so we know that in general, more carbon we put, actually the higher the concentration would be. And so the lower the pH, and that's linked to the problem, for example, of ocean acidification. But the point is like here we have information of the pH, so we can basically get information out of the PCO2, reconstructed PCO2. Right, so how many BGC floats, biogeochemical floats are already out there? This is a map from last month showing the distribution of the biogeochemical floats. And so for context, we have many more floats in the water. We have about 4,000 like floats, like a fleet that has been maintained in the early 2000s. For about 25 years, we have been having 4,000 floats sampling the ocean. And in the last few years, these biogeochemical floats have been deployed. We now have about 800 biogeochemical floats, even if not all of them are like fully kind of geared up. So not all of them have, for example, pH sensors. Only about 500 have like pH sensors, which is what is indicated here. Right, so the question now is, well, or the problem, as we were saying, is like we really don't have enough observations to fully capture like seasonal cycle or interannual variability, and that leads to big like mismatch like with the model, for example, like ability to reconstruct the oceanic carbon cycle. So one solution is like, okay, well, we need to increase our observational array, leveraging the fact that we now have biogeochemical floats. I guess I didn't say this, but biogeochemical floats, one deployed, they can live for 5 years. And so the point is like we could deploy them in areas like the Southern Ocean, which are poorly sampled, and then they could like again keep sampling that area for every 5 years. The cycle can be 10 days or can be shorter, so they can really get to seasonal variability as well. And so the goal is to have enough observation again to reconstruct this like shorter time scale for variability and improve the model. But so the question is, how many do we need and where do we need them? Considering that each of them cost about $100,000. So we don't necessarily just want to go and deploy as many as we want because that's a costly operation. And so this comes to like the problem we're trying to solve. So in this example I'm just going to use machine learning to try to test the different sampling design and see which one would be the most efficient at reconstructing the PCO2 in the model. So this is actually all model-based, and I'll briefly outline the exercise, and then we get to kind of get ready to the actual Jupyter notebook where we run this exercise. So first of all, as a simplified version, we are not trying to reconstruct a full carbon cycle, sorry, this full seasonal cycle. We're just focusing on 1 month only, which is February. And we get using the data from 2008 to 2010 only. So we're subsampling like the whole, like again, decadal range of observations that we have. So then how do we do it? We use a model like output, which is the Nemo-Pisces model. It's an ocean biogeochemical model at a 1/4 degree resolution. And we assume that the model is the truth. So we have the PCO2 field from the model, and that we assume is like that is correct. And so what we want to do is like, we want to test how different observation design are capable to reconstruct that PCO2 field. So we subsample the model, so we create synthetic data, pseudo observations at the locations and times where we had actual observations. And then so we can test the different observation design. So the 3 designs we will use, and we will actually get to this like in the notebook, you will see the actual 3 different designs. Because basically one is going to use a SOCAT data only. So it's basically using only the ship-based data. In the other test is like it's SOCAT data plus 25% of Argo floats around us, like distributed around the whole Atlantic Ocean. And then in the third design is like what we had only ship-based data and 25% of Argo float, but only in the South Atlantic. So then we'll see which one of these designs is going to be most efficient in reconstructing the PCO2 field. The 25% is like, I'll show you this a little bit later, but it comes from a test like that they did like in the paper, and also tried the different percentages. So this is just one of the examples that they tested. One note of the Argo floats, like the map here in the middle shows the Argo floats. You can see this is way denser than the map of the biogeochemical floats I showed you before. This is assuming you're looking at all floats available, including core floats that didn't have pH. So we just make an assumption that what if they were all equipped with pH sensors? So that's a bit of an assumption here. And then, so the steps will be like, okay, we have these 3 designs. Then we can train a model to reconstruct the PCO2 concentrations from these 3 designs, which is basically looking at like the correlations between the PCO2 and other properties, like our predictors or features, which will be, for example, like every physical or biochemical properties that affects the PCO2, like a temperature, salinity, the mixed layer depth, and chlorophyll, and so on. So we'll have a list of predictors that we will use then to reconstruct the PCO2. And so we train 3 different models based on the 3 different designs. And then we'll test basically which one of these designs would be the more efficient. So the data will be, some will be used for the training, some for the evaluation, and some for the validation. Does it make sense? Good point. Yeah, I guess a mix of those. Like in general, you want better like a PCO2 reconstruction, which means both like in terms of spatial distribution and standard deviation. So you also want to try to catch the same variability. And then ultimately it also comes down to like the cost of the operation, right? So if you have 2 designs which are like gives you similar results, it's like which one would you implement if you have a cost limitations, which ultimately is often the case when you run these type of operations. So ideally, you can start saying like, I have all the money that I want, you know, how many do I need to capture like the spatial and temporal variability that I want? And so, yeah, that will be like the first thing, which is actually then this is a case of, for example, when we add Argo floats, comparing, do we need to add them everywhere or can we add them only in the South Atlantic? So in the part we know where we're lacking most of the observations. You can do sensitivity tests, I guess, yes, with data simulation. This is, and it has been done like, I guess, in the past. It's like this honestly also runs faster to play around with the different sampling scheme. But yes, historically, it's like when they design this, is like, well, neural networks are not even around. So they will do like the simulations and do the sensitivity test to what they could capture. Yes. Any other questions? Okay, so we're now getting ready to exercise. So I put the link to the repository already in Slack. So hopefully you have done that. really what you need to, well, two things. So one is a repository, which is where it's really one Jupyter notebook only you need like to work with. But the data is stored somewhere else because it's, I mean, it's not huge, but it's a like significant size. So the data will be like the output from the NemoPiscus model. So that is in as another repository, which I realized I did not put the link in the Slack, but the link is copied in the GitHub repository. So hopefully that you should be able to download that. And ideally you want to download that, that is in a zip folder, and unpack that folder in the same folder where you have your code. So everything is like in one folder. So at the end of it, I guess, what you will want is to have like this, like all of your Jupyter notebook, as well as all the data unpacked in the same folder. So that will be step one. And then we want to set up the notebook in a virtual environment. So step one is, well, step one, download, like clone the repository. Step two, download the data. And then we create a virtual environment. I had issues in creating a virtual environment depending on Python versions, etc. So I'll do that in a second line if there are any issues. Aha, okay, thank you. Oh yes, sorry, here. You mean in this, yeah, because in the, yeah, I used to have a dot, I guess here. Yeah. Aha, thank you. I can correct it. I will actually run it now. So yes, sorry, thanks. So Tom and Omar, I think, are floating around if you have issues. This should be this one. So when setting up, I'll do, I mean, I have it down cloned, and I have a data in this folder, which is, I guess, what I have here. So this is the data. Data is mostly in a CSV files. And then I have a Jupyter notebook. So what I want to do now is set up a virtual environment. So actually, this will be the corrected version, or I can, yes. It should be about 500 megabytes, so hopefully it shouldn't take a while. Yeah, might take a minute, that's not, but I knew I should have put it on a USB stick, which I didn't do. Oh, you do? Oh, thank you. So the notebook shouldn't take an hour to run. So we can spend a few more minutes making sure everybody is ready to go rather than losing people along the way. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's not what you do. Where you get it moment. Yeah, it's one of that where someone we first time like this. If someone will be louder. Now we USB stick. I think, yeah. Yeah. Oh, do you have? No, it's there actually. I think, yeah. I wasn't sure whether you're talking about the data.
I'm sure. Are you happy for people to use this?
So it's a data on the okay, good to go. Right. Okay. So who is still trying to download the data? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, just to know where to. Oh, and this should be now updated with the dot. Okay. For the ones who have downloaded, I'll just go to the next step in case anybody mostly has issues. So well, I do have a tissue, so I'll show you what the error you might get is and how to fix it. So if you want to create like a virtual environment and you just do it with, I guess with, yes. Oh, sorry. Yes, it's much bigger on my, how do Thank you. Better? Little more? Okay, okay. So now it's, okay. So if you create that and, sorry, I never remember these ones. That's how embarrassing one. And then you try to install it, the requirements. Some of you might get this error, which is related to the Python versions you have and the computer you have and the Torch version. So, so the way to do it, well, you deactivate first your virtual environment, and then you want to check what Python versions are available. So you can just do that, which is everything is in the repository. So in my case, I have a 3.11 and 3.12 as well. So you want to use a version that is like up to 3.11, so less than 3.13, which would be like my default version, which is the version was trying to use when creating a virtual environment, and that was given the error. So what you want to do at this point is still, rather than using the 3.13, when you set up your local environment, you want to specify the version of Python. So in this case, I'm saying now use a Python 3.12 in setting up the virtual environment. Does it make sense? You repeat the steps, just specifying the Python version. And at this point, you can just redo so the activation. Oh, because how do I always introduce typos? Sorry. I know, sorry. I thought I fixed one, I think, and I introduced another one. And then at this point, everything should work, and you should be able to install the requirements. And once that is installed, you can run your Jupyter Lab, and you should be able to open the notebook. The notebook, is anybody already at that stage ready to go? Okay, fantastic. So the notebook is the first part of introduction is basically what I already covered, as well as the data. So that is just like for your reference later on. The slides will also be added to the repository, I guess, later on. But they're not yet set it up. But you have a basically summary of what I covered already. So you can start, and we start basically from section 3, which is discussing like the machine learning basically features. And as I said before, we're not really going into the details of the architecture. That depends really on the problems to some extent that you're trying to solve. So it's a bit of empirical, basically, test there. So this was, you know, so we're taking the architecture basically as is in terms of, you know, number of hidden layers, a number of features, etc., and so on. But hopefully, at least it provides, like, you know, a base if you want to then reapply this to other type of problems. Everyone is there, and mine is not the fastest. Let me know. I can go to the VS Code where it's fine, at least we can get started. Is everybody good to go to start the notebook? Perfect. Okay. I mean, I see the people nodding. If someone is not, please say so. Because yes. Get another minute. Okay. Okay. So yeah, fantastic. At least it means things are working. Great. Okay, I'll start this so I can just basically run it along you. Otherwise, you know, if you run out of time again, I have solved the version. So you'll see the results anyway up to the end. Okay, so again, as I say, introduction, same what I just discussed, and the data discusses like the three designs again. So I'll actually, if everybody then is here, I'll just start this since this might take a while, and in the meantime we can discuss the features. So this is like again, so for the model, as I said, is like we take it a bit as a black box. There are actually past ICCS against summer school. Sorry, zooming in again. Yes. How do I also reduce? I don't need this. And I can zoom in. It's gigantic on the screen, so I have a hard time understanding. Yeah, what's the right thing for you? Okay, hopefully this is good enough. Right. So there are like more like introductory basically courses on, I mean, we can find a lot of material in also online, but specifically for ICCS in like a, well, actually the session that was also just run this morning, as well as in previous summer school, gives a more introduction to neural network. So what's the target? The target here, so what we want really to solve again is the PCO2, the partial pressure of CO2 in the NeMo-Piskus model. And the predictors or features are, so as I said, like a list of physical and biochemical variables that impact the PCO2. So what we can use basically again to predict those fields. So those are sea surface salinity, sea surface temperature, mixed layer depth, the chlorophyll concentration, the sea surface height, and the atmospheric CO2 mole fraction. So you can see it's a mix of dynamical information as well as biochemical information from the chlorophyll. Right, and then of course, well, we have lat and lon, so like spatial coordinates. So again, and we subsample all of this information as well from the model, as well as the PCO2 like concentrations from the model at the locations where we had observations. In general, it's like before you really use all of these variables, you want to normalize them. So you want to make sure that there isn't one variable that basically dominates over the others in terms of weight. So in some cases, you will need to change the distribution. So for example, the chlorophyll mixed layer depth have a very skewed distribution. So these are log transformed, and then they are normalized. The data that you have already in your exercise, it's all normalized. The problem is, of course, if you plot them, those are like you need to take into account they are normalized data. So that, like, you know, in terms of the units, you will need to convert it to go back to kind of sensible values. But so everything is ready to go in that sense. So is everybody then ready to go? And some of you said already have a plot. So the first part is actually, well, apart from importing libraries, is really just reading in the data. So we have different data sets to start with. So we have a train data set and an evaluation data set. So the training is, again, what we use to actually train the model. And then the evaluation is still using part of the training. Is basically like the model can compare with the evaluation data sets and adjust its weights basically as along the way. And then we will load later on like a validation data sets, right? Which will be actually when we want to test like the skills of the model. And so we have a three different like observational arrays. And so we have a training and an evaluation data set for each of these three different designs. So, because this was not running. Okay, because I did not. Okay, this is now done. Now, when I ran this last time, I did not have, I didn't unpack like my like folder, so I didn't have a CSV file. So if you do unpack it, it just loads the data. Here it gives you a sense of how many training data points we had. Yes, sorry, is there a question? Oh, this one you mean? Oh, sorry, what's the question? Can you repeat that again? Sorry. Yes, exactly. So the target, yes, is the PCO2. So that's the variable we want to predict. While the training data is your features, your predictors, temperature, salinity, and so on. Yes. No, that's a good question. Thanks. Yeah, of course. Yes, that's very good point. So this is well, I'll well, it is already plotted, I guess, but I'll replot it. But if you run this here, this is actually shows you, so the number of points is, well, for the ship-based data, so this is a design number first. We're just using ship track data. So it's the number of points we're taking February as a month and the year. So the number of points is just limited to that. And then in the other case, we're adding like 25% of Argo flows. So it has a few more training points. When you, I guess, this is, I mean, it's a good question in terms of introducing to the problem and on overfitting, right? In terms, I guess, you want a model then that is not too simple because you want to reconstruct like the patterns, but also not too complex. Otherwise, you start also overfitting, isofitting all the outliers or, you know, possible kind of noise if you wish. So the number of points, it becomes an important when you're setting the number of parameters and the architecture of your model, in terms of how many layers, etc. And you want to guess a good number of parameters. The rule of thumb is like, which is like a factor of 10. So if you have, like in this case, about 10,000 training points, about 1,000 parameters. So that limits you, I guess, in that. And I think Tom or you know these things also better than me. So if you have things to add to that, please do. But yeah, so you can see it's like, so hopefully if everybody got to the first point, this shows you like the three the three designs we are testing. So in the first case, we only have a ship-based observations. In the second case, we are adding Argo floats, 25% of all the Argo floats that we had in those years in the Atlantic Ocean, assuming all of them have pH sensors distributed across the whole basin. And in the third case, we only have some Argo floats in the South Atlantic. So most of this data set, I think about, if you will, like the evaluation data is a subsample of that. So about of the training set data set, like 75% is for the training, 25% is for the evaluation. So actually, gets back to the point is like, okay, so if you look at these three training data sets, which one do you think, which like model do you think will ultimately do a better job at reconstructing PCO2, surface PCO2? Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You have more data, great. You cover like bigger areas. Exactly. So in terms of both spatial and temporal variability. And then gets that down to the question also what Tom was asking is like, do we need that or can we simplify it basically maybe with a third one? Right. And so then we get, okay, now we train the models. So we will train 3 different models, right? Based on like these 3 different like designs. And so we will use the features, right, to predict the PCO2. There is an early stopping design here to avoid that overfitting. So it basically is looking at like the validation loss. And so if it starts increasing or it's basically not decreasing anymore, it stops like the training. So these are the steps that so you can hopefully start running this and you see like the, oh no, sorry, this is, there's still like, we're not there yet. We first need to actually, this is get to the point to initialize basically the model. And so when you initialize the models, it actually tells you how many parameters we have. The number of parameters depends again on the number of features we're using and on the number of hidden layers and on the structure of those hidden layers, which are kind of listed here. So in total, we have about 1,000-ish points. And this goes actually back to the question you was just asked in terms of, you know, what is it like a good when compared with the number of training data points. And it kind of fits a rule of thumb that it is about a factor of 10. So we're hopefully not overfitting. And how many iterations with the model? I guess, well, do before stopping, I guess, if there is not significant improvement. That is in the patients here. So this is the early stopping basically part. And so we say like do 30 iterations. If after that the validation loss is not decreasing, basically stop that. Does it make sense? Still a few people nodding, not many, but hopefully that's good. Right, okay, so this is now where we get to the training the first model. So we're training the model just with SOCAT data, so with the ship-based data only. So this will take a few minutes. So can everybody tell me like better reach that point? So I have a few more slides to show you like while we see this like going either now or at the next steps. But so basically, all you can see is it's like, you know, the validations lost is decreased. So it saves the model because it means it's like training. Well, whenever it increases, it starts counting the early stopper, right? So whenever then at that point we reach a point where that validation loss is just doesn't decrease anymore, the early stopper was truncate like the training.
Patients that therapy mean that you have to see 30 numbers of validation.
Correct.
35,
And then it stopped, exactly. It's not basically learning. Yes, exactly, exactly. So it should, I don't know, normally takes 200 to 300 epochs now. Like, I mean, it's set to run for longer, but with the early stopping criteria. So normally if you are like, have I guess, a training loss that keeps decreasing, but an evaluation one that starts increasing, that means you start overfitting. So again, it's learning all the outliers, etc. So it's not really good at then extrapolating like the reconstructing the patterns like of temporal or spatial variability that you're trying to reconstruct. Okay. Yeah, it should, I mean, it should take maybe, I don't know, a few minutes, but not forever. And we should be able, again, so this is a training number one. So the other like two lengthy-ish process will be training the other two models. But once let's get done with this, and then we can see just like the training and evaluation loss for the first one. And as we train the other two model, I'll just show you like a bit more like in general the results from the paper to get a sense of why also we have now only these free designs, and you know what else could you do, like what other design could you do, what else did they test, etc.
Sorry, it said on the so yeah.
But so has it already completed it for you? Or
Yes.
okay. Okay, it was fast. Okay. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Well, I might ask ICCS a new laptop then for a new machine. Yeah, I know exactly. Well, this is, yeah, so the issue also of the different Python versions in Torch is like, for example, you know, on old Mac like this one, it does happen. On the new one with M1 processors, it doesn't. So that's well, so yeah, I realized it, yes, well, 2 days ago. Everyone else is stuck at any step before, or just patiently waiting for the training to happen? Okay. Should be almost, well, for some of us it's already there, for some of you I guess it's already there. It should be, I think, not too far off. Ah, it's still we have time until 12:30. Sorry, say it again. The name of it? What? What? Well, I mean, but well, that was chosen, well, as, I mean, it's doing a decent job in terms of like, but also the biogeochemical special component. But, you know, you can choose another model per se. There are different models that will have, you can look at the different biases, the spatial and temporal. But, so was that your question? Oh, no, I don't think it has a data simulation. I think, yes, it's just for no, yes. So yeah, you could use, but some of the also like products that assimilate data don't necessarily also always assimilate the biogeochemical data. So for example, well, I guess ECHO, like the estimating the circulation and climate of the ocean, they have a version which is called ECHO Darwin, where we also assimilated some of the biogeochemical information, for example, but a lot of times still they also just assimilate dynamical information. So of course that still helps, I guess, in constraining your tracer budgets as well. But again, because it's just a computational cost, also how long it takes to assimilate all of that data. Okay. Does that answer? Sorry, okay. Okay, so it's finally completed for me as well. So, I mean, you can, well, this is just again rerunning, but this is again plotting like the training and evaluation loss, right? So is the early stopping, I guess the question is like, what did you say about overfitting? But hopefully you agree that it's not overfitting. So the evaluation loss also still decreasing. It's not started increasing. So we should be good with overfitting, with not overfitting. Okay. Now, the next steps are to train the other two. So hopefully some of you have already started that process, if not completed that. So while that is running for me, I'll go back to this. I just wanted to show you a bit more context. Okay, so this is taken from a paper where we actually tested this. And so as you can see, they have, so sorry, I guess I never said this, like, but we call it like OSSI, so like observation system simulation experiment, right? It's a simulation where you test like different observational systems. So that's like the acronym there. And in the paper, they really tested many more than, so we're now testing here 3 design, we tested 11. Started with like what we are using, like SOCAT data only, so only ship-based data. Then we said, okay, what if we just have Argo floats, basically? And then get into a combination of the ship-based data as well as Argo float. But you can see the number here was a bit small, but the column there on the right shows the number of floats on average. So in some cases, we have about 400 only, I mean, it's 400 in the Atlantic Ocean only, which is quite a lot in that sense. Compare again, we have, if you remember, it's like about only 800 biogeochemical floats worldwide at the moment. We would like to increase that, but actually the goal is about 1,000. Again, due to also not computational, but cost-like limitations. And so then it comes down to the question of like, how many floats basically do you need? And here we tested, you know, scenarios with 25% of the floats or 10% of the floats, some only in the South Ocean and sorry, in the South Atlantic basically, and some across like the whole Atlantic basin. And basically just the summary is really, well, I guess I'm spoiling maybe the results we'll see. But what they found is like that this combination of ship-based data plus Argo profiles only the South Atlantic plus the moorings to really cover the continental margins seems to be really the most efficient in terms of doing a good job at reconstructing the PCO2. So as a mean, you can see this is very similar. It's 7371, so it's really, I mean, they don't have, I guess, error bars, but it's really pretty good. And it does a good job also capturing the variability. And you only really need 48 Argo floats in this scenario, so spread out over the South Atlantic. So again, much better than having to deploy in 400. So that's one thing. Sorry, I'm flipping back and forth because I want to see. Well, I'm going to assume this is still training the second model. So the one with for me, I just want to make sure that's okay. Yes. And then, yes, so So this is, again, all the things that they tested. And again, the goal is like I said it's like we have like about 4,000 floats overall globally. But really what the goal will be to implement what is called like the one Argo design. So most of the floats we have are core floats, so temperature and salinity only. Then we have biogeochemical floats, which again we have started to deploy, but this is really something over the last 5 years or so. And all of these floats still only cover the top 2 kilometers. And we have an average depth of 4 kilometers. So we also have a deep Argo floats, which can go all the way to 4 or 6 kilometers. So the one Argo design will be a combination of these 3 different types of floats and trying to get to, what is basically the minimum number you need for the different types of floats. And this type of simulation experiment, like what we're doing now, is actually being applied also to design this compilation of floats, because, for example, again, you might not need oxygen sensors on all of them. You might need a mixture of a biogeochemical or of a deep floats, etc. So it's trying again to mean, and this is like the design as it is taken from the Argo website. The areas that you see are more have higher densities because there is a higher natural variability. So we want more floats in those areas. But it's hard to see, I guess, here, but this is mostly like uniformly gridded. And so that's also the point. We don't necessarily need, right, to spread them uniformly across the ocean. And again, so especially for oxygen, actually, now the question is like, we can actually have oxygen sensors on the deep floats as well. So we don't want to kind of double sensors. It costs maybe 10,000 extra to just add an oxygen sensor to each of the floats. And so again, how many do you need, etc., is part of another observation system simulation experiment that is going on right now. Right, so where are we? Okay, so my code is done training the second model, and now I'm just starting the training of the last one. And in the meantime, sorry, I'll keep flipping back and forth for at least, hopefully, yes, sorry. Whatever. Correct, exactly. And then we just play with the testing later on. Is everybody fine? Are we all either still training or done with the training? Perfect, okay. And if not, Tom is there. So to help, I think. Okay. This is just getting already to a conclusion, but it's mostly feature work. So maybe this, I think it is related, but I guess, well, I can say now, but the thing is, now we're trying, this is more, I guess, maybe not so uplifting, I guess, message at the end, but what we're trying to do is to reconstruct PCO2, right? And so because in the ocean, because that tells you about air-sea fluxes. And which is great, of course. And then the question is like, okay, if we do that and we implement this design, are we done? We're sorted, we can then reconstruct the ocean carbon cycle. Like, well, not really. And the point is really in the first, well, in both plots. Well, one is, I don't even know all the details of it, but carbonic chemistry just got, in a sense, way more complicated than what I showed you before. There are a lot of processes that we didn't necessarily discuss, including export with sediments, a burial like carbon, for example, etc. But one big thing is that which is shown here in the first plot on the left, is that for one single value of PCO2, sorry, this is a plot showing the dissolved inorganic carbon on the x-axis and total alkalinity on the y-axis. So the dissolved inorganic carbon is really, when I said before, CO2 dissociates in carbonate and bicarbonate. So all of those species sum up to what is the total dissolved inorganic carbon. The alkalinity is the sum of the bases, so the carbonate and bicarbonate and a few other species that actually basically can sequester hydrogen protons. So it's a way, basically, if you wish to buffer like pH changes. So it's another way to look at, there are all basically different variables that constrain the carbonic chemistry. And so you can, the contours here on the back of the plot, if you wish, are PCO2 contours. So you can see that for one single PCO2 value, you can actually have a different dissolved inorganic carbon and alkalinity values, which basically means there could be different processes that lead to that one single values. And it goes back, I guess, what was said at the very beginning, it's both ocean dynamics and biogeochemistry. So you can have a more in-gassing or outgassing, more photosynthesis or respiration, which are all of these basically compass error here. So here you have a more outgassing, or ingassing, the photosynthesis, which is a P here, or respiration. And then you also have classifiers, like organisms that form shells, and so they can have more classification of this solution. So if you can reconstruct a PCO2, great, you can have information of the fluxes. But if you want a mechanistic understanding of like what is causing that PCO2 values, you will need to actually have more information of the whole carbonic chemistry, which gets to the point of, you know, from ship-based information, etc. For example, we only measure PCO2, but there is actually more technological effort now to have sensors that could measure more parameters of a carbonic chemistry at once, like PCO2 and pH, or PCO2 and disordered organic carbon, or PCO2 and total alkalinity, or pH and the DIC, disordered organic carbon, etc. So you can have different combinations and reconstruct the missing parameters. But the point is like what from PCO2 only, you can't have then a mechanistic understanding. And so when you want to try to see how that will evolve in the future, it becomes harder, right? Because you don't know how different processes will change in the future. So that is like, I guess, in terms of, you know, future work, you would want to think about also how many more sensors do you actually need, not just for PCO2, but for a combination of variables for which we still really don't have many observations. For many of these, it's still like ship-based only in terms of you need to take the water, analyze it in the lab, etc. We don't have sensors for many of them. Okay, so this should be now done, hopefully, a training. Oh, of course it's not. Okay, I have a plot below. So I'll just keep going for now while that is finishing up, even if it's not moving along the way. Or maybe that's just, no, almost finished, hopefully. But here you can see like the training loss and evaluation loss for all the three different like models, which kind of look pretty much like the same. Okay, that is actually done. So I don't think I need to run this. This is just plotting. Okay, so now we validate the model, which basically means we use the model to reconstruct the PCO2 across the whole Atlantic and see how well that compares with the actual model results, which was our true. I guess one thing which is really not good. Well, this is from an from an older one. I guess I will rename the variable, so I do run it. But so this also is a bit of a lengthy process. But in the meantime, what I wanted to say is that for simplicity, I guess, of this exercise, in the validation data, we also have a point that were used for training, which you wouldn't normally want to have. So this was just a bit of simplification when building this exercise. So the data, again, that the model has already seen in the training and evaluation is also in the validation. Normally, you would exclude that. Has anyone already completed, I guess, this step? I believe so, because I'm running a bit behind. So can you just give us a number? So when you do this step, you should print out the validation loss for the three different models. Can someone who has done it read them out?
Just so you have
Okay, yeah, well, that's, I think, okay, that's interesting. It's, yeah, I mean, in the sense, yes, you expect in general to, when adding Argo flows, to be better. I guess when I ran it last time, the second one, as predicted, was doing slightly better. So I'm curious to see why the last one, I mean, the two should be comparable, really, close enough in that sense. Do you get the same, or do you get the... Okay. Okay. Okay, yes, well, okay, yeah, they should be pretty much comparable, which is, again, yeah, I mean, the interesting part is like, okay, then, well, maybe we don't need, again, Argo data, like Argo flows everywhere. Well, this runs, I guess, well, one thing is we're now getting to really visualize a bit more of this, like the skills of the different models, because of course, then the validation loss is like, well, one metric to look at the performance, but we want also to have a sense of how well does it perform at reconstructing like the spatial variability as well as temporal variability, right, of these fields. And so basically like you don't want to look at just like one metric and one average, right? You want to see like, it could be like a compensation, basically also errors hidden there. So, what do we do? So there should be then a few plots, basically, right, coming up. So which actually is looking, so we're looking at the mean PCO2, the standard deviation of the PCO2, and then the correlation basically between the model and like the reconstructed like data. Does it make sense? Okay, so first one is showing like the mean of the PCO2 concentration. So this is like micro atmosphere. The first plot is from the actual model. The second one is from model plus SOCAT data only. And then the third two, the last two are from SOCAT plus 25% of Argo floats distributed everywhere. And when we only distribute Argo floats, yes, in the subdomain. Well, sorry, yes, I guess that wasn't clear. You train it on the where we have observations, but then the predictors are sampled like like in the model, like we have like the information of temperature, salinity, and all the predictors basically across like the whole basin. So we can use those to reconstruct, to map out basically the PCO2 across the whole Atlantic Ocean. No, it's a different one in the sense. So yes, sorry, we have a training and evaluation, and the evaluation is what you were saying, like those wiggles, and the validation is basically now using a machine learning model to reconstruct the PCO2 and then comparing it with like the value in the model. So in the places where, well, so normally you will do this in places that the model has not seen in the training or evaluation. What I was saying is like, this is out of, well, I'll blame it on laziness probably, but or like the simplicity of exercise, we had the whole data set, which includes the training and evaluation point. So normally those will be excluded. So it's basically trying to predict the PCO2, right, in areas that it has never seen before and see whether it's doing basically a good job or not. That's a validation part, yeah. No, very good question. No, exactly. So next steps, which I mean, it's not done in this exercise, but exactly. So whenever you use like your model or even your actual observations, you will be an uncertainty, right? And we don't include that here. But that will be like in kind of other observation simulation experiments, you will want to use that. And another thing is, I guess we don't include is, so we assume then the floats are kind of static in that location. Again, there are other techniques if you wish like to, you know, those are going to float around. So you might want to take into account like, you know, where to deploy them. Like, you know, it can get more sophisticated and taking into account of where it will move. Right. I mean, this is more, I guess, it's more what I guess I finally finished this for me. This is more, I guess, what I was expecting. But this tool is like in some cases, again, are closer to each other. But in general, the second one should be slightly better than the third one. But as you were seeing, like in some cases, like very marginally so. Okay, yeah, so it depends exactly a bit. But that's, again, points, I guess, to the direction that, you know, we don't really need Argo flows everywhere. Right, so I run there. You should have already done so, probably. So it should not take too long before these steps. And well, I mean, the plot I was showing is going to be very similar, I guess, to what is going to plot now. But that was just like the previous, I guess, run. So again, slightly different training. But again, so we're looking at just at the mean PCO2. Again, now we can again reconstruct it everywhere across Atlantic. For the model and the free like machine learning method. And you can kind of already see it's like, you know, just visually like the next plot is going to actually look at anomalies, but even just from this plot, you can already see that when we use a ship based only, we is not doing a great job, well, a bit everywhere, really. The values even in the North Atlantic are overall too high. You can kind of see already, but especially in the South Atlantic. We have a bit more data in the North Atlantic, so do maybe slightly better there. While when we start adding Argo floats, overall, it's like, especially, this big like PCO2 concentration in the South Atlantic starts being captured. And again, the difference between these two becomes a bit more marginal, is what we expected. Right, so the next plot should actually just show basically the anomalies between the model and the three machine learning, basically the designs. So it just highlights really the differences. I can keep talking, or if anybody wants to jump in the conversation, please do add. But again, going back to what we were saying, the first one in general has larger discrepancies, especially, I guess, in the South Atlantic, well, a bit everywhere, really. One thing is, I guess, high altitudes, as well, and especially really the South Ocean, right close to Antarctica, but still, I think, has high discrepancies in all the models, because even when we, so what was actually, sorry, if we go back to the design, we really don't have a lot of floats there still, in the sense that rarely we really deploy many floats this south, mostly because of seasonal sea ice, as you can imagine. There are now floats with the sea ice avoidance algorithm. So they will basically measure the temperature and have a threshold over which they think there is a sea ice, and then we will not resurface. And so they will just sink again and keep sampling that way. And so basically you would need then to wait at that point for the next spring or summer when the sea ice melts. And at that point, they can pop to the surface and send all the data we were still collecting. So those floats will still keep sampling, it will just not send you the data. The limitation of that is that if you don't have satellite communications, you don't know where that float was. So you can get the data, but you can't pinpoint a location. So they have been used in continental margins around Antarctica, and basically they are parked at the seafloor. So hopefully they're not drifting much. They kind of used as a live mooring, if you wish. So there will be, if again, there is more work done with acoustics, for example, to try to triangulate the location of other types of autonomous vehicles. So that could be, again, going in the future, like, a way you can deploy floats. You can use acoustics to triangulate the location, so you can get information also under the ice and have a wintertime observations, which are really hard to obtain still. So that's why still, even, when we train all of this, we still get to quite a big mismatch. Sorry, I'm going forward, I guess we're here. It's still like high uncertainties, like in the South Ocean, especially close to Antarctica. Okay. Right, and so now we're looking at the standard deviations of this, because again, we also want to make sure we are not just sampling, having a good mean, but we also are representing the standard deviations of the PCO2 as it is in the model. I guess here the story kind of a bit starts maybe repeating itself, but if you wish, it's like this is the standard deviation in the model, and then from the three different machine learning, basically reconstruction. And this is again more visual comparison again, but again, ship-based data only is not just sparse in spaces, also sparse both in space and in time. It does not necessarily do a good job, but also capturing that spatial variability, and temporal variability, which is not surprising. And other areas, I guess, but in general we struggle a bit also to our continental margins, right? So those is like, even both with ship-based data and especially with the floats, we don't also deploy floats very close to continental margins. So that's where moorings in those cases would be useful to capture those areas. Okay, and then this is the last bit, is looking at the correlation coefficients between the model and the three neural network outputs. And again, it will show again, well, better correlations for the areas where, well, for the models where we have Argo floats. But and I'm basically to the conclusion. So in the paper, again, you can see some of the maps basically that you have reproduced here, as well as I guess other things that they looked at is different biomes, especially for looking biogeochemical processes. So you can think about, again, going from equatorial, for example, Atlantic to the polar ocean, you will have different biogeochemical conditions. And so it's like, does it change a lot, right? Whether you have, for example, more floats in areas where maybe the biogeochemical processes contribute more to the exchange of CO2 or not. So they also like looked into that. But otherwise, it's pretty much like what you have like run here today. And hopefully this tells you like the bottom line of this is that you don't need Argo floats everywhere. And again, you don't need to deploy, how many was like 400 Argo floats, I think, right? If you were like, no, sorry, well, it's still like 100. Well, definitely you don't need Argo floats like at the 3-degree resolution, which is normally how they are spaced. Even just 25% of them will be enough. So that brings down the number to 100, but really you can only deploy about 50 in the South Atlantic and still do a much better job. I guess I didn't run this. I'm going to do the plot but do a good job at reconstructing the PCO2. And then the question is like, can you bring that number down to 10%? It's like, it was not really from their evaluation, but this goes back into like, well, maybe, including the certainty of the data or including the fact that the floats moved, etc. Why did okay, sorry, this does take a bit of time because to calculate the correlation coefficients. Okay, but anyway, this is I'm actually finishing early, so should be happy about that. You have a few, I'll add the slides to the GitHub in case you want to have them for reference. There are some reference there and a few more here. The SOCAT data set is actually updated basically every year. So which is, I mean, that is great, but really it's like a well-maintained like data set. And hopefully this will not die now. But again, this is much more on the applied side, I guess, right? So we took like, we didn't really dive into like, again, how to build your neural networks. But for that, there are some of the references like in the papers also that for which I have links describe a bit more, like, the choices of actually or using the neural networks, for example, in the first place, or not. And this is like, yeah, again, the correlation basically coefficient as again, it's pretty low in many areas, it's like, especially in the South Atlantic, but really a good chunk of it when we don't have really Argo floats. So, which again is expected, but it overall seems, yeah, better when we really have the data only in the South Atlantic, which was a bit interesting results. And again, that means saving a few million in these operations because it's 100,000 more or less per float. So saving 15, it's not bad. Does it help? Any more question? Hopefully it was useful or a bit more on definitely on the data side, but I am more, again, I said, this physical oceanographers, I do actually spend time at sea and collecting this data. So I do use machine learning for this type of more problems, or again, mapping when we have enough data, like we train it on like, historical data that has like, where we have enough, especially temporal resolution, you can start to try, creating gridded products. So at least you solve for like a spatial sparsity at least. But again, in some cases, it's like people say you just go autonomous and sample everything. You still need in situ data from ships to calibrate your sensors, unfortunately, to some extent. So they will always be dependent on ship-based observations, but they are still really at the core of, especially when it comes to biogeochemical processes. So for TNS, I think we can play around with autonomous vehicles a lot more, but not really when you start thinking about carbons. This paper is actually really nice in doing that. So I'll open it up mostly because I wanted to show you a plot. But that's a very good point. It's like different models. You could use another one. why is it? Sorry, that's what I wanted to do. There are different models will have different biases, which is kind of shown here when looking at things. No. No, then. Yeah, I'll get it is in my backpack. What I wanted to show you is, so I showed you like the results. Yeah, so this is a bit better. Yeah, so Nemo is pretty good at this. So it's a bit the pink line here. So I can move actually. Well, the microphone won't be. Okay. Oh, thank you. Wow. That's it. All right. Thank you. Fantastic. Thanks, Dominic. Right. So what this shows, this is an annual flux in a control run. This is like in pre-industrial. So if a model was in perfect like balance, you will have zero basically annual flux in this case. So it's not looking into like scenarios where we are increasing the concentration of CO2. So all of those fluctuations are like biases basically in models at different frequencies. The NEMO one is the pink one here, actually. Is it? No, sorry, it's a gray one. Well, which is sorry. Yeah, it's the gray one, which is basically a bit under that. That's a bit of the bias as you continue. Yeah, there are other, but this is again biases like as annual average everywhere. So when you want to look into spatial and temporal, if you wish biases or temporal, are some are here. So the point is that this is a bunch of ocean biogeochemical models, for example, that you can repeat the exercise with. And some, again, have intrinsic biases based on the parameterization, for example, that we're using, and some have less so, but depending on how the model is built. That is like, yeah, that goes back to the point, I guess, some are useful, none of is perfect, I guess. So you want to probably repeat experiment with a bunch of them and confirm the results that, you know, we really need only 25% and only in the South Atlantic, and if that's the case. We don't really have investment observations really to compare it with, because that's a point we can't kind of grant truth to the observations, because that's the point, we don't have them. So that's the problem. Yeah, you could do that. Yeah. I mean, yeah, but or you could use again. Yeah. I mean, reanalysis, yeah, depends on what your time frame also you're trying to look at, I guess. Shorter time frame, especially, yes. And also one thing is, I guess, sorry, but to mention is we only looked at 1 month, right, and only 3 years. So best results could be different for if you're really trying to get the seasonal cycle, and we use the data only from 3 years. So we're looking at interannual really variability at most. But, you know, if you wanted to actually also capture the decadal variability, the design might be different. But yeah, so you can apply this basic once you have a machine to a number of basically products. And you would want to include the data from like multiple years and multiple months. But yeah. Sure. They have, yeah, but yeah, if they stay, they usually last 4 or 5 years with like a sampling of every 10 days, more or less. No, it's yeah, yeah, that's, I mean, I guess the pressure case is like what, like, you know, working under pressure, that's the point of like, yeah, powering them. So they still just have lithium batteries and they last, they're quite efficient, I guess, in using them. If you want to keep them longer, you can change. The nice thing is that because of satellite communications, you can also talk to the float and say, start sampling, I don't know, every 20 days or so if you want to prolong their battery. But if you're under sea ice, that's also the point. It's like you can't talk to them either. Like, yeah, so but yeah, so they've been deployed again in few areas like in the Western Antarctica to monitor like also melting rates, etc. in the area. And so far they've been successful in that. But yeah, there is always, you know, you deploy it, never deploy one if you can. Maybe deploy 2 or 3 at least if you wish, especially in continental margins regions, because the risk of losing one on the ice is still pretty high. But yeah. But the engine is just buoyancy engine, but basically just the pump oil, they have a vacuum as well. So we change like the volume and so we change the density. So it just become like lighter or denser. And and the other autonomous vehicles function the same way. So that is pretty efficient in terms, they just need to, yeah, exactly, yeah. Okay. If there are no more questions, you had the 5 minutes extra before the lunch break. Thanks a lot.